afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Synerzip's webinar series. I'm Jill Hurston. I'm the Marketing Manager here at Synerzip. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just some real quick housekeeping things. So during the webinar, feel free to ask any questions through the questions box on your GoToWebinar window. We'll try to get to all of them as appropriate throughout the presentation. The webinar topic will run about 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll reserve the last 10 minutes to address your questions. And please note that the webinar is being recorded, so tomorrow about this same time, you'll receive an email with a direct link to the recording and to the slides. So with that covered, allow me to introduce today's topic, which is working with non-collaborators. One question we ask is, how can we deal with non-collaborators? We aren't going to get the chance to change them, but we might have to work with them or work around them. But how do we know? In today's webinar, our presenter describes how to identify a non-collaborator who can be a leader, a team member, a team, or a process. She'll talk about the system in which a non-collaborator works. She'll address similar concerns for ourselves and evaluate our risks in dealing with this non-collaborator and finding out if we want to take that risk. Today's speaker is Pollyanna Pixton. And Pollyanna is not new to Synerzip. Last summer, she presented on team ownership, and you can still find that recording on our website. And that one was so well received, so we've asked her back to share her expertise on collaborating with non-collaborators. Pollyanna uses her collaboration and collaborative leadership model to support organizations in creating environments that are highly productive, innovative places that encourage people to contribute their talent and creativity. She also directs a think tank that works to increase collaboration and creativity. And this work provides the functional foundational theories and practices of Excelinova. Pollyanna is also a co-author of two books. One is called The Agile Culture, Leading Through Trust and Ownership, and the other is called Stand Back and Deliver, Accelerating Business Agility. And recently she started as a contributing writer for Forbes online, and I'll send that link in the follow-up so that you can follow her on Forbes. So now, Pollyanna, over to you.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon where you are. I'd like to talk today about how you can collaborate with non-collaborators. We have these problems, we have these people in our organization, and so let's see what we can learn, or what I can provide some tools for you to try and work with these people. So let's talk a little bit about me. Started out with a degree in mathematics. I did 3 years of graduate studies in theoretical physics. I went out and started writing code. Did my time as a developer. I went back and got a master's degree in computer science, and I started doing leadership. One time when I was working at Honeywell writing code, someone came up to me and said, "We'd like you to be a team leader." And I said, "Well, don't be ridiculous. Leaders just get in the way of us writing good code and doing our work." So I thought maybe I better figure out how to be a better leader. So over the years, I've read up about it, I've tried things, and I've come up with a set of proven tools that I've used over the years to help leaders deal with their leadership charges and their responsibilities. I built the electronic stock exchange for the Swiss bank, so that was the first large-scale Agile project, and that was 30 years ago, so I've been involved in the Agile world ever since. And I was a co-founder of the Agile Leadership Network, and I write a lot. You can find a lot of my articles out on the internet in several places, and I speak at several conferences. So enough about me. Let's see what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about who non-collaborators are, so you can identify them, what makes them tick, what are your intentions of dealing with these people and your risks, and the tools you can use to deal with these people. I want you to take a minute and think of a non-collaborator you struggle with. Well, I'll bet that didn't take long. We all seem to know one, and we have had them in the past, or we have one right now we're trying to deal with. So, what type is it? It can be a leader, it can be a team member, it can be another team. It could also be a process. A real non-collaborator process is often, in my opinion, the independent performance reviews, because they're only one way. We are not evaluating our leaders. We are only getting evaluated. And I think that's non-collaborative. That's just one example. I bet you can think of more of them. So why don't people collaborate? What's going on with them? They just don't seem to want to collaborate. Well, one of the things is they probably lack collaboration skills. They don't know how to collaborate. Very difficult. They may lack trust. They may be not trustworthy, or they may be trustworthy, but they may not trust the other people around them. And the other one is fear. They're afraid of losing control. This is a very big issue, especially in large companies. The fear of someone else taking credit. And again, we come back to independent performance reviews. If you're stacked ranking people in independent performance reviews, then I don't want someone to take credit for my accomplishments, because I need to be recognized, and I don't want them to be given the credit and seen as better than I am. So it's a very combative situation when that happens. There's always this fear of failure. And it's very big in our economy right now. People seem to feel that fear of failure means they'll lose their job. If they fail, they'll lose their job, and right now that's what nobody wants to have that happen. The economy is turning around a little, but they're still rampant about fear of failure. And finally, I see the most common non-collaborators are the ones that say, it's all about me. They're self-centered. Some of them are very passive-aggressive. They say one thing and do another. Or they'll go along with you just fine, they get angry. Or they express their anger and hostility through subtle manipulative methods. They want power and control. They like to be in control. They often have personal agendas. Above all, they must win. They have to be right all the time. So it looks like this. These people have to win, often withhold information to elevate their importance in the organization. One of the most difficult situations that I see all the time is a team member will withhold information the team needs to succeed. And when the team goes into crisis, they swoop in and give them the information, and everything turns around, and this person is seen as a hero. And what does the organization do? They reward him. They're rewarding him for bad behavior. And that's something we have to be very careful not to do. These people they think they're superior to people. Not only think that, but they also know they are superior to other people. They sabotage others in an effort to look better. This is very tricky. They always want their fingers in anything under the spotlight. They want to be in in a starring role. Any new projects in the organization, any innovations in the organization, they want to be there. So think back about your non-collaborator and think, what kind of non-collaborator are there? And it's oftentimes, it can be all three of these or just two of them. It's a very interesting idea. So that'll help you identify the right tools that we're going to talk about in a minute. First of all, we have to figure out, what makes your non-collaborator tick. What is their focus, and what are their motivators? Now, you may not absolutely know, but you need to trust your intuition here. You need to think about what your intuition tells you might be going on. So you have to also think about how they define success. That's a very big one. And what are their fears? What are their hot buttons? So that's a very interesting idea. You need to know their hot buttons so you don't press them. You don't want to do that while you're trying to deal with them, because it's irrational and they're not listening after that happens. And you should think about if they have any hidden agendas. The biggest hidden agenda I often see is they want to be in the inside circle. They want to be in the decision-making processes. They want to be close to leaders that do make those decisions. They want to be seen with power. And then some organizations, I find it fascinating that people feel that the more people they have reporting to them, the more important they are. And I just think that's very interesting. They're not thinking about their contribution to the company and to the bottom line, and especially to their customers, adding value to their customers. One of the most interesting ones I saw was a leader came in with a highly successful, unbelievable turnaround leader. She came in over this one and immediately took away some of the most powerful tools the turnaround leader had in an effort to show her power and her position. And that's a non-collaborator with a hidden agenda. Instead of looking at this person was successful and helping the company move forward and in getting in revenues early, she had to have her own power and exercise it in just that group. It's a very you might not know what the hidden agenda is, but you must keep your eyes open for it, and just trust your intuition.
Pollyanna, a quick question that just came in is, and you might have just answered it, how do you discover what these hidden agendas are, or how do you discover what the non-collaborator views as their own successes?
Oftentimes you just need to ask yourself when they talk about their successes, how do they define success? You can
get out and ask the person.
You can.
Casual conversation.
You can also. You can. Yeah, you can ask them. You can also ask people that work for them. You can ask somebody that their peers. You can, but oftentimes for me, I talk about. I watch and see. Are they talking about promotions all the time? Are they talking about, that whether they are worried about customers and customer feedback, whether they're worried about what their bosses are thinking? You have to listen very carefully and read between the lines. It's really something. And a hidden agenda, you may not be able to identify it, but just trust your intuition and if you feel like there might be one. So one of the keys is if they don't put purpose over their personal agenda. If they don't have a purpose, oftentimes people will talk about, well, this is a strategy I'd like to take on, and I always say, well, how does that value our customers? How does that bring value to the organization? Can help me understand that. and therefore you can find out what they mean and if they have a personal agenda behind it. Okay?
Great, thank you.
You bet. What are your risks? Sometimes dealing with a non-collaborator, if it goes wrong or goes badly, it can be very detrimental. You have to be prepared to deal with consequences. I often thought that it was higher risk to work with a non-collaborator was a leader. But after having several conversations and thinking about it and watching situations, I think it's with any non-collaborator can be risky. You never know who they influence and who they have in their inner circle of allies. So you have to be able to prepare and figure out what your risk level is. And here's some questions to help you deal with that. Some of them are very big, like can you deal with being fired? And some of them are very small. Can you deal with your career being, well, that's not very small. But public humiliation, can you survive without your mentors? Are you going to be okay if you're not in the inner circle? Can you deal with any negative labels that you didn't deserve? You have to figure out what your level of risk is and what you're willing to take on. One thing about when you start thinking about your risks, think about and recall the successful risks you've taken in the past. Nobody gets into leadership positions or management positions without taking risks and succeeding at them. So you've probably all had that happen to you, and just keep remembering them. All right, now let's get down to some tools dealing with non-collaborators. I'm going to talk about the general ones first, and the most important one, in my opinion, is have 3 people in the collaboration, or 3 people in all conversations at all times. This is based on John Nash's game theory that he won the Nobel Prize for in economics. The idea is if there's 2 people in a conversation and one is withholding information, it's very difficult for the other one to figure that out. But if there's 2 people in the conversation and one is withholding information, it's highly probable that the other 2 will find out and discover it. Think about all the times that you get on the phone with your non-collaborator, just you and that person. I mean, and they say things and you get off the phone and the next thing you know, they never said it. So always have another person in the conversations. And it's important to remember that this person should be neutral. They shouldn't be a non-collaborator. They need to be neutral. They can't be in your corner or this person feels like they're being ganged up on. But it's just someone to sit and listen. It can be more than one, but at least you have to have one. You have to find some common ground, no matter how small it is. I once ran into a buzzsaw in a meeting where we were trying to do some planning for a new product. And I arrived and there was a woman in the room who was just absolutely resistive and wasn't going to participate. And she had good ideas, I knew that, and it was important she'd be in the room. She was a key player in the team, but for some reason, she was not collaborating. She was not participating. And in the break, I saw her in the break room and I started talking to her, and I discovered that she had a dog that she dearly loved, and I had a dog I dearly loved. And so we started talking about dogs. And it seemed to break the ice. It was a very small thing, but it worked. And it's amazing to me how that can happen. And just one thing to connect and make you like a common, understanding with each other. You want to share all the information you can. You legally can. I always share all the information I legally can. and be transparent as much as, always, in my opinion. And then you ought to provide all the data and information people need before they need it. Don't ever be seen as withholding information. It's really not, then you've broken the trust and you have no chance of collaborating with this person. Find an influencer to influence your non-collaborator. This is very fascinating to me. I watched this process go on for 6 months. Vice president had gotten together a working group, and the head of the working group would come into the vice president's office or get on the phone with her and report what the group had decided. And she was, the vice president was like, huh? She wasn't quite sure. So she saw a few of the committee members and asked them what they were thinking, and it wasn't anything like what the head of the committee was saying. So she kept trying to talk to her on the phone and kept trying to talk to her on the phone and saying, can you help me understand? And it wasn't going very well until finally she found another person who this leader of the group listened to and respected, and asked her to help. And that person turned that leader around, and she became a real collaborator. So it's very interesting to use that tool. I think it's a very powerful tool. Speak so you can be heard. They're not going, as Jill mentioned, they're not going to change. They think they're fine, and they're valuable people, and they're not going to change anything. The company needs them. So they're not going to change the way they speak. You're going to have to learn how to understand their language and learn to speak their language so you can communicate together. It's very important. Practice a forward-going approach. That means you go to them to work with them, not waiting for them to come to you. I remember I worked in a company called backcountry.com that sells outdoor equipment online, and the marketing people asked me to come in and work with them on some marketing strategies. And one of the things they said to me was, well, we have a really hard time knowing what engineering is going to put out there on the website next, what kind of features and ideas and things they're going to do. And I said, I noticed when I came in the office that it was all open space, one big, huge room on the floor. And I said to him, well, why don't you just walk across the room and ask them? And they went, oh, okay. So they started doing that. It's a simple thing, and sometimes we get caught in old thinking. So reach out to your non-collaborator yourself.
Pollyanna, could we take a quick question?
Sure.
Going back to the slide where you suggest you find an influencer to help you. One of the questions that came in is, do you have any info on how that third party helped turn the non-collaborator around?
The idea that happened there was it asked her to, one of the things that I found was to find, help this person understand their value of, that they're part of the team. So this person had thought she was just a reporting mechanism, and it turned out she was not participating in the decisions of the team. So the influencer helped her understand that, yes, she got to speak up, and she got to ask people why, questions like, help me understand why you think that way, or that's what you would like to do. So instead of just being like an administrator, she was now giving, giving empowerment to become a team member and help with the working group. That's what happened.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Bring solutions, not just problems, when you come with your non-collaborator. Don't come with just random ideas. Bring some ways to solve the problem and then ask them what they think of those. In the end, we have this idea that we are high trust equals low command and control. I think about that. If you have any disagreement with that, let me know. We work from this model, the high trust and the high ownership model. And if we have high trust and the teams or individuals will not take ownership, then we have failure because nobody cares. This is the biggest fear that leaders have, that they'll end up here. And it is not a sustainable state. They cannot stay there for very long, hardly a minute or so. It makes them very uncomfortable. So what do? They move down into control. And you get command and control. And the leader becomes a bottleneck. And if the team or the individuals want ownership, they work very hard and you get conflict. And this is also not a sustainable state. So the team loses its, gets demotivated, loses its motivation, gets demotivated, and gives up and doesn't work very hard. It's a very interesting thing that there is some data floating around that under command and control leaders, teams are operating at 50% or less productivity. It's a very interesting idea. So what we want to do is we want to get to high energy and innovation, where teams are trusted and leaders are free because the teams take ownership. So, where is your non-collaborator on this map? Think about that for a minute. Where would they be? Because we're going to look at some of these areas and see what kind of specific tools would operate with those. Let's look at conflict first. Appreciative Inquiry. This is a very interesting tool that's been around for several years. When I got into the Agile community, it was a Diana Larson who said, you need to look at this, Pollyanna. It's a very powerful tool. And I thought, oh, it's a little fluffy for me being a physicist. But as I looked at it, I find it the most powerful tool I've ever had, I ever know of, to deal with conflict. Works like this. We usually solve problems by identifying the problem, analyzing the causes, and planning the actions. We have a basic assumption the organization is a problem to be solved. But appreciative inquiry looks forward. You value what is, you envision what can be, and you discuss the next steps. Because the assumption is an organization and the people know the possibility. I call this fall forward. I believe that we learn more on how we recover from our mistakes than how we got there. So, if you look in the past, you can end up in the blame game very easily. And fixing it going forward, we already know what not to do. So what we really should be doing is working on the right side, discovering and realizing the possibilities. What's working? Where's the passion? What's possible? And how do we achieve it? How do we get it done? How do we go forward? What do we need to make this happen? It's a much more constructive method of working. Micromanagement. Yeah, I think almost everybody's had a micromanager once in their lives, I think. I'm sure you don't have one now. So, understand why they micromanage. You have to understand what's going on. Most of the ones I see is that they come up through the ranks solving problems, and when they get to leadership position or management position, they still want to solve the problems, and they have a tendency to not let go. They want to be in control. They're afraid of losing control and that things won't get done. It's very scary for leaders. And you have to be especially aware of this for the new leaders. They have a really hard time making the transition. I remember working in a lab on a year-long project to build a control system for electrical power plants. And we were doing the factory acceptance test, and we had about 40 people working on it. Factory acceptance test ran 5 days, all day, every day. And the customer came in to run it. And 2 weeks before the factory acceptance test, I walked into the lab, and I looked around, and I knew exactly what they needed to do to get there. And I stopped myself dead cold and realized that if I told them what to do, they would most likely succeed. But if I did that, I would have taken away their chance to succeed. But they wouldn't have failed. So I had to take a deep breath, turn around, and walk out. They succeeded so well, they finished the factory acceptance test in 4 days. It was very amazing. When people have ownership, they really succeed well. Another thing you can do is work with your micromanaged person and build a cube together, either in your mind or with them personally on a piece of paper, certain sides on it, and say, I'll tell you what, as long as I'm operating within this, would you give me a chance to prove myself to you and kind of stand back for a while. So that's always a good, polite way of saying, keep out of my way, which is very difficult to say to micromanagers. You have to check in with them regularly, let them know what you're doing all the time. It's useful. Figure out their best way of communication. It's phone, email, or sitting in their office once in a while and finding out what you want, and then just keep a regular schedule so they know what's happening. And then decide whether you can build trust with this person. You don't have it already. So finally we come to the high trust and low individual ownership. Come to a passive non-collaborator. One that has a lot of fear, lack of understanding, maybe cultural differences because they don't know how to fit in, or they don't want to, they fit in with their culture, they don't understand the other culture, and they may have differing goals. Find out what they are passionate about, whatever it is, work or otherwise. And ask them what's holding them back from achieving those passions. And then advocate them for pursuing their area of passion. It's very important. If people do what they're passionate about and they do best, and we can find them a fit in the job where all those three things intersect, when people are very happy, and it works really well. So you need to find out, start with their passion. Passive-aggressive non-collaborator. Competitive, lack of respect, self-preservation, personal agenda, big time. They want to be in control. They want power. There's a lot of passive-aggressive people that we have to work with. In my opinion, it's when I see the most of them. I see more of these than any other kind of non-collaborator. So let's see how we're going to work with them. Don't engage in a power struggle. Because once you've engaged in it, they have won just because they got you to play. And it will be very deadly. It can be very badly, go back very bad very quickly. Wrap them in process and make sure that the only step they can take is into their responsibility. So someone once asked me, well, what if we don't have a process for them? I said, make one up. Think of all the useless processes that you have running around your company that are either rarely or never used. Probably they built them for a non-collaborator that was passive-aggressive. But this will work. Don't let them dodge accountability by saying you don't have the authority. I always remind people that everybody is a part of the organization, and everybody is part of the team to bring value to customers and value to the business. And if you don't start participating in that, then maybe you won't have a company to work for. So everybody has to own what's going on in the company. Make them commit in public. So many times they'll say things to you personally, and then, man, bam, they'll still deny it, right and left, right when you walk out of the room. Or they'll say in a meeting, yes, I agree with that, but then they'll go out and say, well, that's a piece of crap, we can't possibly do that. That comes to this idea, make fun out of being dysfunctional. You have to remember that people that are being dysfunctional are getting some kind of reward for that behavior. And your job is to find the reward and remove it. And keep in mind that negative feedback can be a reward for these people. It's very important that you stop that. Stop giving them negative feedback. I had a person that was very passive-aggressive and was a chairman of the board, and I was doing some strategic planning work with him and for a nonprofit. And he came at the break and asked me a question that was rhetorical. He was just trying to get into an argument and try and prove I was wrong and be disruptive. And I said, I just stood there and didn't say a word and didn't even move my body, not even any body language in response. Remember that 93% of our emotions are communicated through body language. And he tried several times, and finally he gave up and started participating. So it's just I stopped the reward for his bad behavior. And it's very important that you find out what it is and stop it. And
Holly,
reward,
what are other
yes.
ways you can find out what your dysfunctional people are being rewarded?
What other ways how other ways can you find out?
Yeah, or what are some other ways that they're being negatively rewarded?
They can be negatively rewarded by team members, seeing them as, team members become very quiet, non-participatory, they don't collaborate with them. And so that means that they've, these people are, especially when these people say they know everything and they do everything and they take over people's jobs and tell them everybody how to do something all the time. And that's one way. And the Scrum Master or the team leader does not call them on it, just lets them keep doing that. I see it in meetings when they try and interrupt all the time, or and people let them do that. If someone's being disruptive in a meeting and going off topic, I do not call them on it. I just turn my shoulder to them slightly, so my back slightly to them, and ask a question for someone else to answer in the room right in the middle of their sentence. So those are some ways that I deal with it, and I can see it happening. You have to be, and I watch in the cafeteria what's going on. If some people are together and or listen to what they're saying in the coffee room, or if the one I find very interesting is if they're chatting away, talking about something, laughing and giggling, I sit down and I shut up. That's very interesting. That's a heads up that something's going on. So those are ways if you just observe and watch and listen between the lines.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Find something you agree on no matter what. It's very, no matter what it is. Just anything. Okay, we can agree that there's an architecture problem, or we can agree that this data needs to be managed better, or we can agree that this needs to happen. But you don't necessarily need to agree on the solution at that point. They'll think their solution is better than anybody's. And people don't do it their way, they're not going to participate. And you can't reward that behavior. Again, take the fun out of being dysfunctional. So, and then ask them how they want to solve the rest of the other problems that are going on there. Whatever happens, be very clear. We're not going to let them be leaders. Recently, I saw in an organization, well, not only did they have a passive-aggressive leader, he was also mean and a bully. So in public, he'd be polite and nice. In private, he'd get people alone, and he'd just bully them and berate them and raise his voice with them. And he would always deny that wasn't happening because he did it one-on-one. Eventually, this leader it got isolated slowly and realized that, and they finally let him go out of the company. It's costing him too much and a lot of talent leaving from underneath in his organization, which they were very upset about after a while. But very key. So you also have to ask if it's a non-collaborator, is they ever going to be able to collaborate, or you're going to have to work around them. I don't see this very often, but I think there are lots of ways you can collaborate with a non-collaborator. But there was one in a big company, and he kept moving. There's some interesting people in companies that seem to float around the company. I don't understand. No one holds them accountable. They don't have any real responsibilities. They float around the company. They show up at meetings. I don't know what they're doing there. These are often non-collaborators because they don't have anything else to do with them. And somebody's probably working around them. Excuse me. When this happens, and you're going to work around them and you're going to deal with them, every time you deal with them, reflect, don't react. These are my favorite words I use with these people. I'll get back to you on that because I'm usually like, they pushed a button, or I can't believe I'm hearing what they're saying or whatever. But I need to reflect, not react. So I buy some time by saying, I'll get back to you then. And most important, can't take this personally. It's not about you, no matter what. And this is very difficult sometimes because passive-aggressive people on the surface or non-collaborators on the surface can be okay, but then underneath they're very manipulative. And you can't take it personally. It's not about you. You have to leave the room if you cannot deal with it. When all else fails, you probably have to remove them or isolate them, put them on an island, deal with them on an island. Send out what you need, and they'll send it back. Because your job, his number one job, is to protect your teams and the team they're on and take care of it. And then you have to consider that if it's really a bad situation and you can't work with them at all, it's maybe time to move on to another position in your company. So remember your non-collaborator.
I got a quick question that just came in that kind of deals with these. Like, what if you are dealing with somebody who is maybe an over-collaborator, meaning they're a great performer, they're individual rock stars, they really do their own job, individual performers, but other people on the team just don't want to work with them?
That's a different kind of non-collaborator. Is that what's happening is this person is, what my best guess is, this person is taking all the ownership and telling everybody what to do. And you see this sometimes with on agile teams with product owners or business people trying to deal with engineering teams. That the product owner will not only tell the people what to do and why they want it done, but they'll tell them how to do it. So if this person is an overachiever, in fact, someone just called me out 2 weeks ago about a person like this in their group. And the idea was, I said, have a chat with them about how they can help the team succeed, and that's where you're going to reward them. How they can become a mentor for the other people, and how they can work with them. And that's what you begin to reward them on, and ask them to help the other team succeed. But I'll bet you anything, they're taking all the ownership away from them and telling people what to do and how to do it themselves. So they are a non-collaborator. Just looks like they're a star. Again, you have to also look to see if they're withholding information so they can save the project, or they can make themselves look important to the leadership.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay?
Thanks.
You bet. So remember your non-collaborator that we talked about in the beginning. What are you going to do next with them? What are your next steps? And that's summary. We talked about these 4 items. And here's the books if you want to learn more. The Agile Culture Leading Through Trust and Ownership is all about the trust and ownership model. There is a whole chapter which elaborates on collaborating with non-collaborators called Hitting the Wall. And there's also, the next Forbes article is going to be about collaborating with passive-aggressive people. That will be out and posted this week. So, do you have any other questions?
While we wait on some other questions to come in, and everybody please feel free to chat in your questions and we'll get to them quickly. Pollyanna, would you mind going through the next couple of slides, and I'll just give a real quick Synerzip overview.
Okay, here you go.
And if you could go to the next one would be great.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Just Synerzip kind of at a high-level glance. We operate as a partnership, and we seamlessly integrate with all of our clients' existing teams. We offer high-caliber employees. We have a very selective hiring process, and we hire engineers with higher levels of experience, and our turnover rate is very low, so our clients can expect a very low churn on our product delivery. We can also deliver approximately 50% cost savings compared to hiring locally. It's often very hard to find the right talent locally and affordably. And then on the next slide, if you would advance, that's just a snapshot of some of our current and past clients. And over the past 11 to 12 years, Synerzip has partnered with over 100 companies. And then on the very next slide is our next webinar, which will be on May 12th. And it's going to be a technical webinar on Hadoop versus Snowflake. And so you can register for that on our website, plus I'll send out a link directly on the follow-up email that I send out. Let's see, I had some questions that have disappeared off of my screen. Let's see, one of them was going back to when you have 3 people in an encounter. And I know you said to make one of those people impartial, but what if you end up with 2 people on the call in your trio who are non-collaborators?
Well, you have to either bring in more people, or what I always do is watch them in a team setting and see how it works. Because if they're non-collaborators, the team will know it, and you watch their performance. It's one of the great things about sprints and Agile is you can see how people are doing together in, weekly, 2-week sprints or 1-week sprints. So you watch them function. The idea is if you have 2 non-collaborators that are working together, then it's really, really rough. And you have to either separate them drastically or remove them from the organization. Robert Sutton writes about this in his book, The No Asshole Rule. He's a Stanford professor, and he wrote this book talking about how to keep dysfunctional people in your organization means you're giving permission to everyone, and permission for them to be dysfunctional or to be, non-collaborators. So you have to find them and weed them out. Oftentimes when I have any hint of teams are struggling with two non-collaborators on them, or I have two non-collaborators, I have a hint, that's going on, I actually do some interviews or some chats with everybody on the team and ask them what they'd like to do, what they think they need to do to make things work better. And pretty soon, if you do it so they understand that it's confidential, pretty soon you'll understand what's going on. This happened once on a Scrum team, and the Scrum Master, after 3 sprints, we sat down and checked because they were struggling, the team was struggling. We did a check-in, and the Scrum Master was a non-collaborator, and there was one other one on their team. And the Scrum Master just laughed and said, "We can't make this happen. We can't get things done in 2 weeks. This is impossible." So we eventually moved both non-collaborators out of the team, and the team soared with the new Scrum Master. It's one of the best performing teams we have. So you have to listen between the lines and ask really good questions and see how they respond.
Okay. While we're taking some of these last questions, could you just rest the presentation on your summary slide? I have some people asking, just so they can see that while they're asking some questions. Yeah, it was 86. There you go. Mm-hmm. And then when you discover that it's more of like a personality conflict, or one person gets along, seems to be the non-collaborator, but gets along with everybody else on the team, so it is just a personality conflict. As a manager, how do you deal with that? Is that when you start removing?
I think one of my favorite things is you can't change people, you can only change processes. You're not going to change people. It's just not going to happen. People will change themselves if they want to, if they want to learn new behaviors. I went from a team leader to a manager to a leader, and there's a lot of change between a manager and a leader. You have to learn that you don't do anything, but that's a change in my behavior. I have to learn to empower people, not tell them how to do their jobs, and it's a very big thing, but that's the only thing we can do is to help people is we can't change them. So with a personality conflict, sometimes you put 2 people in the room and you just walk out and say, figure out how you're going to work with each other, or move them to a different team. It's very,
okay.
Yeah.
And then do you have any advice on working with remote teams? So often in today's society, we don't work in the same rooms or even the same buildings or even the same states. So it's harder to have 3 people in a room, because everything's over the phone. Do you have any advice on how to deal with that?
Well, first of all phone calls with non-collaborators should be done with 3 people on the phone. Don't ever have one-on-ones. If you're going to have one-on-ones, do it in person, or do it over the internet, over something like Skype or webcams or something. And I always use, because of the body language, I always use webcams for meetings with teams. So if I'm remote and I have teams in India or in Florida or Minnesota, they get in a room and I use a webcam so I can see them. I can see all of them. I can see their body language. I can see who's there, who's not there. And talking with anybody remote when they're on their own or they're working at home, it's always got to be visual, not just on the phone. You have no idea what they could be doing for distractions and what's happening. And, bring them into the office, these remote people. The ones that are working alone, you got to bring them into the office a lot of times to social, for them to be with other people. And you can see, first it builds relationships very well. And if it doesn't seem to be evolving, then you know that this is a problem. And you either have to move them or move them out of the organization.
Okay, I like the advice on watching their body language, so getting on video more frequently. Another question that has come in that seems to be a big one is, what comes first, the trust or the collaboration?
You have to trust first. And if you don't, if you don't trust somebody, they know it. They know it immediately. Your body language will tell them. The way you talk to them will tell them everything. So I always believe you trust first. Now, are you going to make mistakes once in a while? Yes, you are. But it's better to have this trust, that you trust them and they learn to trust you, than you having to make them earn their trust. Think how long that's going to take for them to do that. Really, that's going to take forever for them to earn your trust. And it may never happen. So then why waste your time? Once you don't trust somebody, the communication is very difficult. So keep open communication by trusting him first.
I tell my daughter that all the time.
Smart mom.
And then, do you have any advice on how do we teach these collaboration skills? What if our non-collaborator, you think they can come around? How can you teach them how to collaborate?
Okay, so in the book, in both books, there is a process, a collaboration process that we use. And the couple of things you have to do. First, you have to create an open environment. And that means, where it's safe for them. And the other thing is then you use this collaboration process that levels the playing field. Because oftentimes, a non-collaborator, or especially a passive non-collaborator, is being overrun by the loud voices in the room. And so you use this collaboration process, which is a sticky note process, and everybody writes down what they think the solution is or the answer to the questions. One idea on every sticky note. They put it on the wall. They read it out loud. They group them in silence. They rank them. They rate them. They vote in a weighted voting system. One vote for every 3 groups, no matter how many, so you can have like 7 votes if there's 21 groups. And then you talk about, and then you look and see where the highest ones are and start talking or start implementing those. And this means it's a level playing field, and it's a very powerful tool. I've seen executives use it. Imagine meeting with 7 development executives and 7 QA executives over a quality assurance plan that was 1,500 lines that had to be filled out every time a product was released, every time anything was released. And so there was a lot of, anger and non-collaboration in the room, trust me. And the idea was they tried to have a conversation about it, And that wasn't going well, so they got the sticky notes out and used this sticky note process, and they found 5 points that they could agree on, and now the plan is down to 300 line items and still going smaller. So it's a very neutralizing way, and it teaches people how to collaborate in a group and have their words heard and come to an agreement on what the passion is in the group that's doing the work.
Okay, great. I might have to pick up your book myself.
Okay.
And so thank you, Pollyanna. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today. We can try to address the other questions offline.
Fine.
Remember, everybody, the session has been recorded, so I'll have the recording and the slides up tomorrow, and everybody will receive an email with the direct link. And again, thank you so much, Pollyanna, and we hope to see everybody at our next webinar in May on Hadoop versus Snowflake. Thanks so much.